The sharp, unforgiving glare of Jefferson High's fluorescent lights spilled across the linoleum floors, carving harsh shadows between the clusters of chattering students. In the midst of that noisy current, Kira Montrose moved like a ghost, present but unseen. Like, subscribe, share, and comment if this story moved you. Her dark hair, long and straight, draped like a veil around her angular face, shielding her from curious eyes. The sleeves of her oversized sweater pooled at her wrists, a woolen shield against the cold corridors and the colder stairs. Every step she took was deliberate, light on her worn sneakers, her gaze fixed downward on the scuffed tiles as if they alone offered her safe passage. 3 months had passed since she'd been uprooted from her small private school across town, a place where everyone knew her soft voice and thoughtful pauses weren't weakness, but a reflection of who she was. There, she had been invisible in a way that felt safe, like the background hum of a familiar song. Here at Jefferson, invisibility was a survival skill. The sprawling suburban high school, with its 3,000 students and maze of corridors, was a labyrinth where reputations were currency, and the loudest voices claimed the most space. To most, Kira was just another unfamiliar face, and that was fine by her. What no one knew, not the laughing cheerleaders by the lockers, not the swaggering athletes holding court in the hallway, was that beneath Kira's quiet exterior lived a fighter. Years of disciplined Brazilian jiu-jitsu training at her uncle's small dojo in her old neighborhood had carved strength into her bones. Though the long commute had forced her to give up regular classes, the skills had not faded. Muscle memory is a stubborn thing. It clings to the body like shadow to sunlight. It began on a Tuesday morning in the main courtyard beneath the towering oak trees, the mighty oaks that gave the school its mascot. Kira had found a quiet spot on the worn stone steps outside the science building, a sanctuary of sorts where she could lose herself in the familiar pages of her battered copy of The Outsiders. She didn't hear him at first, only noticed the sudden shadow falling over her page. Well, well, what do we have here? The voice was smooth, but sharp at the edges. Kira looked up into the too-perfect smile of Bradley Henshaw, Jefferson's golden boy. 6 feet tall, effortlessly athletic, with blonde hair that fell into place as if combed by the wind. Bradley was the kind of person whose presence filled a space whether you invited him in or not. His Letterman jacket gleamed with patches from 3 different sports, the stitched badges of a schoolyard empire. Teachers adored him. Students envied him. But beneath the polished surface was a cruelty most adults never saw. Reading during social time, he said, his ice blue eyes narrowing in mock curiosity. Not very social of you. Transfer. Girl? Kira lowered her gaze back to her book. I'm fine. Thanks, she murmured, her voice even, hoping disinterest would dissuade him. But Bradley wasn't alone. To his left loomed Marcus Webb, a wrestler with the build of a bulldog and a scowl that seemed carved into his face. To his right hovered Tyler Nash, tall and wiry, his hands twitching with restless energy, his eager-to-please expression betraying a loyalty that bordered on desperation. The 3 of them, the quarterback, the enforcer, the shadow, were Jefferson High's unofficial royalty. When they walked the halls, the current of students parted without a word. Bradley's grin widened as he plucked The Outsiders from Kira's hands, holding it aloft like an exhibit in a trial. The Outsiders, huh? Fitting. You definitely qualify as an outsider here. Kira stood, her hazel eyes lifting to meet his. Could I have that back, please? She asked, her tone calm even as a tightening knot formed in her stomach. Bradley dangled the book just out of reach. Maybe if you ask nicely, say, pretty please, transfer girl. She said nothing. With a lazy flick of his wrist, Bradley tossed the book to Marcus, who caught it theatrically, turning it over in his hands before letting it fall to the ground at her feet. Looks like someone needs to learn some manners. The bell rang. The crowd that had gathered drifted away toward their first period classes. Bradley and his entourage sauntered off, their laughter echoing against the courtyard walls. Kira bent to retrieve her book, the worn cover now smudged with dirt. Around her, a few students glanced back, some with faint sympathy, others with thinly veiled amusement. None spoke, none intervened. At Jefferson High, everyone minded their own business, until the day it was their turn. And for Kira Montrose, this was only the beginning. The days that followed felt like a slow bleed, each one taking more than it gave. Bradley Henshaw wasn't the kind of bully who relied on open threats or obvious cruelty. His power was more insidious, more calculated. It was the smirk that told you he knew something you didn't. The casual accident that left you humiliated in front of everyone. The way he could make you feel small without ever raising his voice. Kira understood the type. Her uncle had a word for people like Bradley, predators of comfort. They thrived not on chaos, but on the smug satisfaction of knowing the world bent a little to make room for them. It started small. One afternoon in the cafeteria, Kira had managed to carve out a quiet corner near the window. Her lunch, turkey sandwich, apple, and a thermos of tea was laid out neatly on the table. She was halfway through her first bite when a shadow passed over her tray. "Oh, sorry," Bradley said, his voice dripping with mock sincerity as his hip accidentally collided with the edge of the table. The impact sent her sandwich tumbling to the floor. The apple rolled away, bumping against a chair leg. Her thermos wobbled, tipping just enough to spill tea across the tabletop. Bradley's grin widened. "Clumsy, clumsy. You should really watch where you put your food." Behind him, Marcus chuckled under his breath, and Tyler snorted like a kid hearing a dirty joke for the first time. Around them, a few students turned to look, their expressions frozen somewhere between pity and amusement. Kira didn't respond. She bent down, retrieved her sandwich, and placed it in the trash. Her movements were slow, deliberate, not because she wanted to savor the moment, but because every muscle in her body was telling her not to rise to the bait. The chemistry incident. The next strike came in chemistry lab. They were working with volatile compounds, precise measurements, steady hands, perfect focus. Kira had just finished adjusting the Bunsen burner flame when Bradley, at the next table, accidentally backed into her workstation. The beaker tipped. A cascade of her carefully measured solution spread across the black lab counter, fizzing faintly before dripping onto the floor. "My bad," Bradley announced, loud enough for the entire class to hear. "Guess some people can't handle the pressure of real science." Mrs. Henderson, the chemistry teacher, glanced up briefly from her desk. "Clean it up and start over, Miss Montrose. You'll need to stay after class to finish the assignment." Kira's jaw tightened. The injustice stung. Not just the ruined experiment, but the ease with which Bradley had sidestepped any consequence. Speaking up would only make it worse. The gym tactics. The gymnasium was where Bradley's harassment sharpened into something almost theatrical. During mandatory volleyball games, he'd position himself directly across from her. When the ball came his way, he'd spike it hard, the trajectory aimed not at open space, but at her head. One particularly sharp serve hit with enough force to make her stumble backward. Laughter erupted from the sidelines. "Didn't see you there," Bradley called out, raising his hands in feigned apology. "Maybe try jumping next time." Kira forced her breathing into rhythm. Inhalation, exhalation, center. Her uncle's voice echoed in her memory. "Control your center, and you control the fight." And she knew. Oh, she knew. She could end it. She could drop him in less than 30 seconds. But she also knew that violence was a door you couldn't close once you opened it. Her academic scholarship, her future, they all depended on keeping that door shut. The gathering storm weeks passed. Each encounter was like a brushstroke painting an inevitable picture. Bradley never went too far in the eyes of authority. Every humiliation was small enough to be dismissed as bad luck, but sharp enough to leave a mark. And Kira endured it all in silence, but not because she was weak. No, she was waiting, measuring, biding her time. The breaking point didn't come in the cafeteria, the lab, or the gym. It arrived instead, wrapped in orange and black streamers, lit by flickering jack-o'-lanterns, carried on the hum of anticipation for Jefferson High's Halloween dance. Kira hadn't planned to go. She had no interest in pretending to belong in a place that had only shown her how alone she really was. But life, like the best and worst stories, has a way of changing its course in a single, unexpected sentence. That sentence came in the form of a folded note slipped through the slats of her locker door. The note was folded neatly, the paper soft and creased as though it had been handled with care before finding its way into her locker. Her name, Kira, was written in a handwriting she didn't recognize. Not sharp and angular like Bradley's mocking scrawls, nor rushed and messy like the notes that sometimes flew between bored students in class. This was careful, almost old-fashioned, the kind of penmanship you only saw from someone who still believed in taking their time. She hesitated before opening it, scanning the hallway to make sure no one was watching. The din of after-lunch chatter filled the air, locker slamming, sneakers squeaking against tile, fragments of conversation rising and falling like waves. No one seemed to notice her. Her fingers unfolded the note. I've been watching what's been happening to you, and I think you've been handling it with incredible grace. Would you like to go to the Halloween dance with me? David Chen. For a heartbeat, she simply stared at the words, her mind caught between disbelief and a strange, fluttering warmth that she hadn't felt in months. She knew who David Chen was. Everyone did, though not in the same way they knew Bradley Henshaw. David wasn't loud. He wasn't the center of every conversation. He didn't walk through the halls expecting people to move for him. Instead, he carried himself with a kind of quiet confidence, as if he didn't need the crowd's approval to know his own worth. They shared AP English. He sat 2 rows over by the window, where sunlight sometimes caught the edge of his hair, making it look like strands of gold had been woven into black. He was thoughtful. One of those rare students who actually seemed to listen during discussions. When he spoke, it was with intention, and every so often he would offer a comment so precise, so insightful, that the room would fall silent for a second before the teacher responded. Kira had noticed him, of course, but she had never imagined he'd noticed her. The meeting. She found him after school near the bike racks, unlocking a sleek, well-maintained mountain bike. "David," she called softly. He turned, and when his eyes landed on her, he smiled, warm, genuine, without the thin veil of performance she'd grown so used to in other people. "You got my note," he said. There was a hint of nervousness in his voice, a fragile thing tucked beneath his calm exterior. "I did," she replied. For a second, the words caught in her throat. "And, yes, I'd like to go with you." His eyebrows lifted slightly, surprise flickering across his face before settling into something like relief. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to go to something like that," he admitted. "I know it's not exactly your scene." Kira's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. It wasn't. Until now. They agreed to meet at the dance. For the first time in months, Kira felt anticipation, real anticipation, bloom in her chest. It wasn't just about the dance. It was about what the invitation meant. Someone had seen her, truly seen her, and not as the quiet girl to be ignored or the target to be mocked. Over the weekend, she and her mother went dress shopping. Her mom, thrilled to see her daughter excited about something, insisted on helping her choose. After several false starts, dresses too flashy, too stiff, too unlike herself, Kira settled on a simple yet elegant navy blue dress. It was the kind of dress that didn't demand attention but couldn't be overlooked either. Her mother smiled approvingly. "You look like you." The day of the dance arrived with the crisp bite of late October in the air. The sun dipped below the horizon early, painting the Denver sky in streaks of orange and purple. By the time Kira stood in front of her mirror, hair styled in soft vintage waves and a sweep of deep red lipstick on her lips, the reflection staring back at her was both familiar and transformed. She didn't look like the invisible girl who walked the hallways with her head down. She looked like someone who might belong. The gymnasium had been transformed. Orange and black streamers hung in graceful arcs from the rafters. Pumpkins, each carved with meticulous care, lined the edges of the room. Colored lights spun lazily across the floor, casting shifting patterns over the crowd. The air buzzed with the low thrum of bass from the speakers and the sound of voices rising in excitement. David was waiting near the entrance, dressed in suspenders and a bow tie, his outfit echoing the old-fashioned elegance of her own. His eyes widened as he saw her. "You look amazing," he said, offering his arm with a gallant little flourish that made her laugh. They danced. Fast songs, slow ballads, moving easily between them. Between dances, they talked about books and old movies, discovering they shared a love for classic films and obscure music. With David, the hours seemed to slip by without the heaviness that had shadowed so many of her days. It was almost enough to make her forget that danger still lingered somewhere in the room, watching. For the first 2 hours, the night was perfect. Kira had almost forgotten what it felt like to simply belong. The music pulsed through the gymnasium, colored lights painting the crowd in shifting blues, purples, and golds. Laughter bubbled up easily from her lips, each moment with David smoothing away the edges of the weeks that had come before. They spun through the faster songs, David moving with an easy rhythm that made her feel light on her feet. When the tempo slowed, his hand found hers, warm and steady, and she allowed herself to relax into the moment. For the first time in months, the shadows that had followed her through Jefferson High seemed far away. "I'm getting us some punch," David said, after a lively dance to an upbeat track. "Don't go anywhere." Kira smiled and nodded, watching him weave his way through the crowd toward the refreshment table. She turned slightly, adjusting the strap of her navy blue dress and smoothing the fabric, feeling the faint thrill of anticipation for the next song. And then, the air behind her shifted. A familiar voice, too close, sliced into the music. "Well, well, look who decided to join the party." Her stomach tightened instantly. She didn't have to turn to know who it was. She turned anyway. Bradley Henshaw stood there, but the perfect polish of Jefferson High's star quarterback was dulled. His eyes were sharp, but his words came slow, the edges softened by the unmistakable slur of alcohol. She caught the acrid scent on his breath. Cheap liquor, no doubt swigged from a flask in the parking lot before he swaggered inside. "And with David Chen, no less," he added, his smile twisting into something mocking. Didn't know charity cases were his type. Kira's pulse ticked upward, but her face stayed neutral. "I'm just here to have a good time, Bradley. Please leave me alone." He tilted his head, smirking as if she'd just told him a joke. "Oh, she speaks," he announced, his voice rising enough to catch the attention of a few people nearby. As if summoned, Marcus and Tyler materialized at his sides. "Where's your boyfriend?" Marcus asked, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "Did he ditch you already?" "He's getting punch," Kira replied, stepping back slightly and realizing her shoulders were now brushing against the gym wall. "He'll be back any minute." Bradley's grin widened. "Perfect. That gives us just enough time to have a little chat about your attitude problem." The music and laughter seemed to dull in her ears, replaced by the sharper sound of her own heartbeat. A few students nearby had begun to slow their dancing, their eyes drawn toward the growing tension. Bradley stepped forward, closing the space between them. His hand shot out and clamped onto her shoulder, his grip tight, unyielding. "You know what your problem is, transfer girl." His voice was low, but the challenge in it was unmistakable. "You walk around here like you're better than everyone else, like you're too good to even talk to people." Kira's breath stilled. "Let go of me, Bradley." There was a note in her voice, a low, controlled danger. That should have stopped him cold. But alcohol and arrogance made for a dangerous mix, and he leaned in instead, eyes glittering. "Or what?" he taunted. His fingers tightened, and then came the sound, sharp, sickening, of fabric tearing. The strap of her dress gave way under the force, the navy blue material slipping from her shoulder, leaving her partially exposed under the dance floor lights. It was as though the music stopped. It hadn't. She could still feel the bass vibrating through the floor, but the noise of the crowd seemed to fade into a muffled hush. Gasps rippled outward, students turning, craning their necks to see. Bradley smirked, spreading his hands in feigned innocence. "Oops, guess your dress wasn't as classy as you thought." And something inside Kira changed. It wasn't an explosion of rage. It was colder, sharper, a click in her mind, like a switch thrown in a silent room. Her breathing slowed, her stance shifted, subtle but deliberate. Her eyes, once guarded, now locked on Bradley with a clarity that could cut glass. "You made a mistake," she said softly. Tyler blinked, instinctively taking half a step back. Bradley, oblivious to the warning in her tone, laughed. "What did you just say to me?" "I said you made a mistake," Kira repeated, louder this time. Her voice carried, slicing through the music, drawing the eyes of every witness in the room. "You should have walked away." The air in the gymnasium had changed. It wasn't just tense. It was electric. Students pressed back instinctively, creating a loose circle around them. Even the music seemed to shrink into the background, a distant heartbeat to the moment building at the center of the room. Bradley stood before her, his smirk twisted by arrogance and alcohol, utterly unaware of the shift that had just taken place inside Kira Montrose. Her uncle would have recognized it instantly, the calm before a precision strike. Her left hand moved before her thoughts could catch up, snapping upward in a clean, perfect palm strike. It caught Bradley square in the solar plexus. The air rushed out of him in a sharp grunt, his eyes going wide as he doubled over, clutching at his chest. Before he could recover, Kira's fingers clamped around his wrist, twisting not violently, but with enough controlled force to send a clear message. Then came the throw. With a sharp pivot of her hips, she redirected his weight, sending him crashing to the polished gym floor in a flawless judo maneuver. Gasps burst from the crowd. Someone's phone shot into the air, recording. Marcus lunged next, bigger, stronger, but too slow. Kira stepped aside, her foot hooking his ankle in a swift sweep. His momentum betrayed him, sending him tumbling sideways into Tyler, who had been trying to circle behind her. The two collided in a clumsy heap, arms flailing. Bradley staggered to his feet, red-faced and seething. "You little..." She was already there. Her hand gripped the front of his shirt. She pivoted again, using his forward movement to slam him back to the floor, this time with enough force to make the crowd flinch. The noise in the room shifted, no longer laughter, but silence heavy with disbelief. The students had seen Kira endure weeks of Bradley's games. Now they were seeing something else entirely, a quiet storm unleashed. Bradley pushed himself up, his legs unsteady, his perfect quarterback composure in tatters. "You want to know what my problem is?" she called out, her voice ringing clear enough to reach the farthest wall. "My problem is bullies who think they can do whatever they want to people who won't fight back." Bradley swung, wild, desperate. She leaned away, catching his arm mid-motion. A turn of her body redirected his strike, his own momentum sending him face first into the decorated wall. Streamers tore, paper bats fluttering to the floor. When he turned back, his nose was bleeding. The perfect image of Jefferson High's golden boy was gone, replaced by something Ross, something afraid. "You're crazy," he gasped, clutching at his face. "You're actually crazy." "No," Kira said evenly, her breath steady. "I'm just done." And then his hand went to his pocket. The crowd reacted first, startled screams and sudden shuffling backward as something small and metallic caught the shifting lights. A knife. Probably part of a costume, but now held low, his grip tight, his intent unmistakable. "You think you're tough?" he snarled, the slur in his voice sharpened by anger. "Let's see how tough you really are." Around them, the circle widened as students stumbled back. The music finally stopped. Teachers began pushing through the wall of bodies, their voices urgent, but they wouldn't reach them in time. Kira didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on the blade. Her body had already mapped the next 5 seconds. "Put it down, Bradley," she said, her voice low but steady. "You've lost. Don't make this worse." But pride and the alcohol blinded him. With a guttural sound, he lunged. Bradley came at her fast, the blade low, his weight thrown forward in a reckless burst of motion. For someone else, it might have been terrifying. For Kira, it was muscle memory. Her body moved like water. She stepped to the side, guiding his arm past her with a pivot so fluid it looked effortless. Her left hand struck upward, connecting with his wrist at just the right point. Pain forced his fingers to spasm, and the knife slipped from his grip, clattering to the gym floor. Before it even stopped spinning, she stepped in close, her right hand pressing just enough against his shoulder to tilt his balance off-center. His own momentum took him down, landing hard on one knee. Kira stood over him, calm, composed, utterly in control. "It's over," she said, her voice carrying through the silent crowd. "Stay down." For a moment, Bradley didn't move. His chest heaved, his pupils blown wide with the dual haze of adrenaline and humiliation. Blood trickled from his nose, mixing with the sweat along his upper lip. Then the sound of heavy footsteps cut through the tension. Teachers, the school's security officer, pushing through the students who now stood frozen in a ring around them. Bradley's knife was scooped up. Strong hands pulled him to his feet. Marcus and Tyler had already melted into the crowd, unwilling to face the same fate. David appeared at Kira's side, his face pale, but his eyes locked on her with something between shock and admiration. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. Kira nodded. "I'm great," she said, and meant it. But her voice softened as she glanced down at her torn dress. "I just need something to wear home." The days that followed unfolded quickly. Security footage told the entire story. Bradley's escalation from verbal harassment to physical assault to brandishing a weapon. Kira was given a short suspension pending review. Bradley wasn't so lucky. He was expelled, and the knife meant possible criminal charges. It wasn't just a violation of school rules, it was a violation of state law. But beyond the paperwork and the consequences, something deeper shifted at Jefferson High. The girl who had walked the hallways in silence was no longer invisible. Students who had once looked past her now nodded in acknowledgement. Teachers who had been blind to the months of subtle torment made a point to check in. Even the popular crowd seemed to carry a newfound respect for her, not because she had humiliated Bradley, but because of how she had done it. Word spread as stories do. Some versions had her taking down a dozen attackers at once. Others swore she'd broken Bradley's arm clean in two. The truth was simpler and far more impressive. She'd stopped him, without cruelty, without revenge, without becoming like him. 3 weeks later, she saw him again in the hallway. His nose had healed crookedly, a permanent reminder of the night in the gym. His shoulders slouched in a way she'd never seen before. "Kira," he said quietly. She stopped, turning to face him. "What is it, Bradley?" His eyes darted away, then back. "I wanted to say, I was out of line. I'm sorry." She studied him, searching for manipulation, for some lingering spark of arrogance. But what she saw instead was something she hadn't expected. Humility. "Apology accepted," she said simply, "but actions have consequences. Remember that." He nodded. "I will." Later, walking toward her next class, Kira thought about how much had changed. She had come to Jefferson High hoping to blend in, to pass through unnoticed, but life had other plans. Trouble had found her, and when it did, she had faced it on her own terms, not to destroy, but to defend. The Halloween dance might have been ruined, but something else had been salvaged, her sense of self. And when David asked her to the winter formal, she said yes. This time, she knew there would be no interruptions, because she had earned her place at Jefferson High through strength, restraint, and the courage to stand when it mattered most. True power, she realized, wasn't about dominating others. It was about protecting yourself and those you care about, while never losing sight of who you are. Bradley Henshaw had tried to break her spirit. Instead, he had shown her exactly how unbreakable she really was.